Hello, everyone. My name is Bunmi Otegbade, and I co-founded Generation Enterprise, which is a nonprofit that helps young people find work, particularly through entrepreneurship. We have worked in Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, and India in the more than 10 years of our existence. For the past, 10, 11 years, we've worked to reduce youth unemployment and poverty, specifically focusing on entrepreneurship. And I do have to admit something to you guys today. This is my first webinar. I have never done a webinar before. So it's a little bit different for me. I'm typically used to people responding while I talk and knowing, what has been said. So we'll, work with me today. I think the only thing I can really see are the comments that you post. So please do that. I realize I may also not be able to share my screen, and I'm hoping that we can get this going at the same way. Okay, now just to give a quick background on myself, a couple of things. Africa Matters Initiative, for those who don't know, is a nonprofit based out of Africa that's designed to build skills and knowledge of African young people and diaspora young people to help change the narratives of their communities. This webinar is to leverage technology to spark critical dialogue. And while the advertised topic is very broad, entrepreneurship, firms, and innovation, which I can't cover, in the time that we have, I think I will try to focus the session a little bit more on young people as agents of change and young people from different socioeconomic strata, and education levels. So whether you completed high school or not, or you have an advanced degree as a PhD holder, how can you participate in the changing of the status quo in Africa, particularly as regards socioeconomic development, and even, technology, science, different aspects of life. Typically I would pause to take feedback and see how people are engaging, but since this is a webinar, and like I said, my first one, I'm just gonna keep going. Let me just give you a quick background of myself and my journey to this point. When I was in undergrad, I studied computer engineering. And the reason I chose to study that is I thought to myself as a young 15, 16-year-old, Africa can be in a much better place than we are. So is there a way I can study computers or something that's relevant that, would help us in the next 50, 60 years, and I can contribute to what's going on? So I was very fortunate to get a few scholarships and ended up in a university that focused on, computer engineering to some extent. So I was at Baylor University in Texas, and I spent my undergraduate years doing research with my professors in robotics, automatic control, which essentially is a branch of engineering that deals with, machines that control themselves. So like self-driving cars, and so forth. My big idea coming out of undergrad was to build self-driving tractors and self-driving sort of agricultural machinery, because I thought that Africa had a big food problem, and that would be the way I would solve it. Now, keep in mind that I didn't have much information or even know enough about where things were, but I thought that that would be a great idea, and so I pursued it. In between graduating and going to graduate school, I had a chance to go back home to Nigeria, and I learned about what I consider one of the biggest problems Africa is facing: youth unemployment. And not just youth unemployment, it's also even, youth unemployment casts it as a somewhat sort of negative thing, but it's also just, how do you engage the youth? How do you engage young people in the most productive way from an economic standpoint, in a politically active way, and also just, making themselves, sort of setting up youth to succeed within the nation as responsible citizens. And seeing that problem from a grand perspective is what made me change my mind about robotics and in agriculture and so forth. I decided to dedicate the next 10 years to trying to solve the youth unemployment problem, or at least find innovative ways to do it. And because I believe so strongly in entrepreneurship, I set up a generation enterprise with a couple of my friends, and we started investing in young people as entrepreneurs. We had a big heart for poverty, and especially young people who are marginalized. So think of, young people from low-income neighborhoods in urban areas. How do we invest $500 so that they can open up their own music rental store, video rental store, or a small bakery if they want? That was the general idea. Now, after 10 years of doing that kind of work across regions, here are a couple of ideas, or rather lessons that we've taken and ideas that I currently argue for. One, that across regions in Africa, tertiary institutions such as universities or vocational schools will take a long time to deliver the skills that the young people need to participate effectively in the economy. And so I argue that small, medium enterprises, firms, which more than 80%, which create more than 80% of the employment anyway in any economy, are the answer. They are the very present vehicle for educating and upskilling young people to participate actively in, at potential in the labor force. Two, I argue that training and a lot of these training programs that are available are not necessarily the best way to get young people effectively engaged. Because for every single one of us who has a job, we didn't get a training and then that training got us a job. In fact, what happened is we got a job, and then on the job, we got trained to do the job properly. These days, there's a lot more evidence from research, including reports from the World Bank, that are demonstrating that a lot of these training programs are at best, it's ambiguous whether or not they're effective. Number three, I argue that low-skilled young people in low-income urban or peri-urban communities, that for them, apprenticeships that are focused on acquiring managerial skills are the most important. Are the most important for their long-term earnings. So it's very common for programs to, like us in Generation Enterprise, give $500 and say, go start a business, right? or in many cases, people just say, oh, hey, all you young people, come do this job or come do this work here and we'll just pay you. Not very many people are thinking about, for that young person, if that person earns currently 20 cents an hour for whatever work they do, is it possible that within 2 years they can start earning up to $5 an hour for the work that they do? How valuable is that work to an employer or to they themselves, to their community, and to their nation? So that's the perspective that I've taken, and I keep arguing that managerial skills and focusing on sort of management ability is the way to help a young person go from 20 cents an hour to more than $5 an hour, or if they're starting from $5, how they get to $25 an hour. A common misconception is to train people who are, well over 40 or something and say, oh, let's provide training for this leadership skill or that leadership skill. Many times they're set in their ways. So the fourth piece of my argument is around early exposure to managerial opportunities, right? Early exposure to managerial opportunities enhance the development of the skills that are needed for young people to succeed down the road. So those are my main sort of points and ideas that I keep arguing about. And in the next couple of weeks or months, I expect to publish some written material that help push that agenda. Now, coming now to a good transition is around entrepreneurship. Why do I promote entrepreneurship as part of innovation, and particularly entrepreneurship through firms and firm building, right? Now, I'm not in Nigeria. We have something called hustlepreneurship, or contractorpreneurship, right? Where you have a friend in government, the friend gives you the contracts to supply air conditioners for the government building, right? And then the price is overinflated, and then you kind of do that deal, and then you're constantly looking for deals and looking for friends, right? Some people define that as entrepreneurship, but certainly not in our sort of framework or structure. We don't consider that entrepreneurship. Hustle is required for entrepreneurship, but I don't think that it necessarily defines entrepreneurship. Now, for me, if young people are struggling to find a job, right? And if there are any young people in the audience here, you're trying to get your first job, and it just sounds like you need to come with 6 years worth of experience to get that first job, and it's like, well, I wouldn't be here if I had the 6 years worth of experience looking for a job, right? Or, you've gone to several interviews and you don't really know what it is that's missing, and it's very hard for anyone to articulate or tell you. Now, what I encourage is for firms, small, medium firms, large firms, to help young people get early exposure to managerial opportunities, because what it does for them is it brings very fresh perspectives to the firms, right? And it truly helps them reach what I call managerial diffusion. So there's a lot more people in the firm who have managerial capability if you start early. Now, for young people in particular, exposure to managerial opportunity comes through trying out businesses or trying out things. Keep in mind that the research shows that not everyone can be an entrepreneur. In fact, it's, I think, generally around 6% of the population that is truly an entrepreneur. So we've seen that as well in our past work in Generation Enterprise. 1,000 people might come to you and say, I want to be an entrepreneur because they don't have a job or something like this. But really only 6% of them really end up, with all that it takes to be an entrepreneur. Now, so I'm going to use that to kind of focus on what I was hoping to talk through with this webinar, which is how does a young person, in Africa who's in a community and sees a lot of problems and wants to do something about it, how does that person tap into the innovation space, to solve those problems, but also to create a job for themselves or for other people in their community. Like I said, not everyone's going to be an entrepreneur, but I do encourage you to seek entrepreneurial opportunities. That means seek firms that are entrepreneurial, seek situations that are entrepreneurial. Sometimes it's just volunteering for a nonprofit that's just starting, right? Or it's, taking the initiative within a community to do one thing or the other. Entrepreneurship isn't, entrepreneurial opportunity isn't always about making money or, being the typical entrepreneur. It's really about taking initiative and advancing the opportunities that you get. So I think that's the very first step. But much of this conversation will be focused on social entrepreneurship in particular, because I believe very strongly that it provides the strongest motivation for innovation. So I'll talk through that for the next sort of 6 to 7 minutes, and then I will pause a little bit to take questions. And hopefully the questions come up in the comment section. I don't know where else they would be. All right. Now, social entrepreneurship. For anyone who lives in Africa or is focused on working in Africa, I believe very strongly that entrepreneurship there is necessarily social. People tend to create a slight difference and say where our entrepreneurship is people, an individual or a group of individuals taking on risk to create profits, right? Social entrepreneurship is then not just about the profits, but it's also about having some kind of social impact outcome defined. I completely agree with that definition. I think that social entrepreneurship necessarily requires you to be more innovative, because social entrepreneurship as a sort of discipline in itself combines design thinking, human-centered design, and forces you to be very sort of systems-oriented in the thinking. There's an image I wish I could show, but you can kind of Google it or look it up yourself. It's like, what are the themes of social entrepreneurship? And this image is like 3 circles, that kind of intersect like a Venn diagram. And on one of the circles is sort of customer desirability, right? What does the customer actually want, right? Business viability is, can this make money? Can this make profits? And then technical feasibility is there technology or some kind of organizational structure that we can use to make this actually work? And right in the middle of all 3 of them is innovation. And my belief is that, that truly is where innovation stems from, is when you pull all of those different pieces together, you see, the real innovation start to come out. One of my favorite professors, he wasn't my professor directly, but a professor that I followed, he's now, he's now a little late. He's now late, I'm sorry, of blessed memory. Professor Clay Christensen, he advanced this idea of disruptive innovation. Disruptive innovation being any kind of innovation that brings people from non-consumption to consumption. It's one of the sort of tenets. He has like 6 or 7 tenets of what is considered disruptive innovation. So for example, you might think that Uber is a disruptive innovation, but he doesn't think so. He believes that, for example, the development of cotton back in the early 1800s or late 1800s, is a disruptive innovation because there was no such thing as a cotton industry. Like many people didn't wear clothes of cotton, but as the innovation developed and then the price of cotton shot down so much, I think it may have been as high as like well over $100 per ounce or something. And then cotton then became as cheap as like $3 or less, per ounce. People started to consume cotton, right, and create clothes. That for him is what he considered disruptive innovation, at least one of the key tenets. And I think that in innovation necessarily that tends to be disruptive tends to take care of those who ordinarily would not be able to consume it, and for me, that's an important part of innovation. Now, I believe that young people, especially youth in Africa, are the best for, sort of generating that type of innovation, and why, right? First off, they have very little to lose, really. You don't have to worry about shareholder value for a $3 billion company, and now you have to be careful what you bring to market and what you don't bring to market. As just a single young person or a group of young people, you have very little to lose. Secondly, young people are the owners of these problems. You are not flying around in your private jet, I assume. So you have a lot of the problems that you are experiencing, many young people like you are experiencing them. And so you are the best one to solve that problem, not somebody who's flying around in a private jet or is a top CEO of some top company, right? Third piece, I think many times the young people I've come across are less aware of limitations, which necessarily helps innovation. With a lot of innovation, we have to just assume sometimes that these limitations aren't there. And then it helps us to generate brilliant ideas, new ideas. And these new ideas, as they are developed, we can always then sort of work around the limitations. And there will always be highly experienced people who can help you get past the limitations. I think the last point I want to make on this is, I try to encourage firms, especially small, medium enterprises, to do their best to continue to foster innovation. Many of them exist because they did something slightly differently from what everyone else did. And that's why they have a space in the market. So, the best way to keep alive and growing is ensuring that you're fostering innovation and that you're working with the young people to keep generating new ideas. Now, the final piece I'd like to mention is, in terms of if there are any young people on the webinar who are interested in sort of taking their ideas to the next level, one particular accelerator that I am familiar with is called the Unleash Accelerator. It's very related to the UN SDGs, and I think primarily promoted by Dalberg around the world. Essentially what they do is just gather up to 1,000 innovators every year, young innovators every year, and essentially just help them get through this idea generation stage, refine their ideas, refine their thinking, and provide a platform for them to all collaborate. It's a fantastic network that I found to be quite helpful and useful for a lot of young people. Of course, there are a ton of other resources out there, but but that's one I would recommend, particularly if you are, in currently in an African country. Secondly, if there is, okay. So I think I'll stop for now, and see if there are any questions. Awesome. Okay, if there are no questions, I will share a few more thoughts, and then I guess wind down the webinar. How can, if I'm a young person, sort of, trying to solve problems in my community, how can I prepare myself to start an organization or take my organization to the next level? Having been an entrepreneur, one key lesson I've learned is that your organization starts with you. Your personal culture, your personal skills and abilities all matter, and they become bigger and more prominent when you start to build an organization. So, for example, if in your family, the natural way to deal with problems is to avoid them and not talk about them, and that's kind of your personal culture as well. When you start to build an organization and get 2 or 3 friends to help you out with this idea, or you maybe even start employing people, that personal culture will come out, and it starts to become the culture of the company, even if that's not what you want. So it is very important to do a lot of self-reflection, to sort of understand yourself and understand your personal culture, the external influences that you've had on your personal culture, and even defining what kind of culture you would want for the organization that you are building. Note that I've started with culture. There are many business school professors who will tell you that, people talk about strategy a lot. What strategy are we going to go after? How do we design this? How do we do this? What strategy are we going for? They'll tell you that execution will eat culture for breakfast. Will eat strategy for breakfast. Execution will eat strategy for breakfast, which means how you execute is what's going to matter, right? And then they will also tell you that culture eats execution for breakfast, right? So culture fundamentally defines how you will execute, right? And in particular, execution is about the systems that you develop for yourself. So if, for example, you talk a lot about, I want to wake up early and I want to, start the day early and have a lot of energy. If you don't have a system for waking up on time, getting things done right on time, et cetera, it's going to kill your strategy down the road, right? And so your person, it starts with your person. And keep in mind, this is a long-term journey, right? It's not something you're going to fix today or tomorrow, right? There are habits you'll have to cultivate. There are habits you'll have to help cultivate in others, et cetera. So I think that would be the first piece. Now, part of it obviously is then training for leadership. Leadership is leadership training and self-development toward leadership is a very important piece. In general, I'd like to recommend consulting companies like McKinsey or Dalberg or KPMG, Deloitte. A lot of these companies train young people early for managerial positions and leadership positions. It's the same thing with the military, right? Whether it's the Navy, military in your nation, military in different countries. access to their leadership and training materials. They do quite a lot to help develop young people very early in leadership skills. Imagine if you join, for example, the US Marines, right, at age 18 or something, and then by age 20, 21, you have to lead 10 guys, right, in a very difficult situation where it's literally a life and death matter, a matter of life and death. You need to be well-grounded in certain leadership concepts. So those resources tend to be super helpful, particularly for shaping your thinking and for helping you learn how to manage people. Another suite of skills I would recommend are functional skills such as systems thinking, project management. Project management is incredibly important. It helps you with everything from learning how to initiate a project to closing it and taking the life cycle of a project. I think project management professional, PMP, has like a whole body of work, right? For you to learn aspects of project management, and really building a company or social enterprise is just a bunch of projects, kind of tied together or even overlapping and running in parallel. So project management is a critical skill. Another critical skill I'd recommend is financial management. From the perspective of a profit and loss, right? Now, if you're ever going to be a social entrepreneur or an entrepreneur of any kind, business viability is an important piece. Now, if you've never run a business before, that's okay. I would say start with yourself, start with your family, start with your family projects, right? A profit and loss statement, a P&L, or an income statement as it's called in the US, essentially says at the top, what is everything we have coming in? And at the bottom, what is everything we have going out? Now, all of us kind of do it on some level, but some of us do it more thoroughly than others. Believe me, if you start doing it for a business, in general, you learn how you can do it for yourself. Conversely, if you start doing it for yourself, you learn very quickly how to do it for a business. So people who tend to be a lot more thorough about knowing which expenses, being able to predict the expenses that they expect to incur over the time frame and so on and so forth, that tends to be really helpful. And of course, if you learn to start managing your finances properly, then you start to learn how to use tools like Excel, and all the other tools out there. And then I think the third piece would be about precise communication, both in written and and orally. For many of us who are not sort of native speakers of a language like English or French, or it can be tough for us to learn precision in communication. So it's easy to say, go get some skills, some entrepreneurship skills. But what exactly are entrepreneurship skills? Can we be a bit more precise? I think, in written communication, in oral communication, it's very important to try to learn some of those. And then last, certainly not least, but almost the most important, is what they call in general soft skills, which are part of leadership skills, of course, but I want to highlight 2 or 3 of them. Emotional intelligence, it can be built. One example I use to express emotional, or to describe emotional intelligence is, first you have to understand yourself, and then you have to learn how to understand others. So, for example, with some people, they process other people's feelings by feeling them. So if you see someone who's sad, you start feeling sad first, and then you approach that person. Some other people think through, or prefer to think through, other people's feelings. So if you see someone who's angry, you don't get angry, you only just say, I identify and label that you are angry. Now, emotional intelligence and building emotional intelligence requires that you are able to identify the feelings that you have as well as the feelings that somebody else has, and then having the right response to address it, right? To essentially manage those feelings. Sometimes that's also called empathy, but it's not necessarily easy for everyone. But the point is, whether you are a feeler or a thinker, you need to develop the ability to identify emotions in yourself and in others, and then learn how to handle them in a way that communicates respect and appreciation, and helps to move in the most positive direction. So I think that's a key soft skill that I would recommend. But as you can imagine, there's a lot of self-reflection that has to come with it. One tool that I have found extremely helpful in understanding the self a little better is the Myers-Briggs personality type indicator, called the MBTI. And the website that I've typically used for me and for a lot of the people that I work with is called 16personalities.com, 16personalities.com. They do a short questionnaire and are fairly accurate in helping you sort of type yourself, right? And even type others, right? So send it to people you're going to work with, or people that you hope to work with, and so forth. Okay. So I think those are my recommendations. The last recommendation is around taking on opportunities. If you design a solution for your community in, say Pretoria, right? Take that idea, travel to Durban, and see whether or not that idea is going to work in Durban as well, right? If you're able to get as far as Nairobi or Lagos or Dakar, right? Get out there and test, see if that idea will work. One thing that sort of global thinking does for you is it forces you to think a lot more critically about the design of the solutions that you have. Make new friends. Facebook, there's so many resources out there for reaching out to others who are like you. And like I said, even the Unleash platform Accelerator is very powerful as well. Okay, so I see a question here. Hi, with regard to social entrepreneurship, how do we as young people find opportunities to be competent as consultants, leaders with knowledge so we can generate an income? Okay. So this sounds like a very loaded question, but how do you find opportunities to be competent? I say that you look around you, right? You always start with your network. Most times we think that there's something out there or someone out there who's gonna just drop the opportunity, and I disagree. I think you need to look around you a lot more closely, and there will always be opportunity. Okay. Christiana says, my friend and a friend were discussing something lately. A lot of youth have ideas, but they need help fine-tuning and validating. And even in the process of implementing the idea, is there an organization or body that can help innovative young people? Because it can get lonely and filled with doubt. You are right, Christiana. It is always lonely and filled with doubt. I don't think that ever changes. I think that's the first thing, which is why entrepreneurship really isn't for everyone. I remember I would say sometimes that I don't wish entrepreneurship on my worst enemy. It can be very difficult. It is always lonely and filled with doubt. However, there is an increasing number of opportunities out there to support young people. So accelerators like Unleash, honestly, I wasn't paid by Unleash to talk about Unleash, but I found them particularly helpful. There are a lot of local incubators in Nairobi, in Lagos, in Abuja. A lot of times they have application processes. They force you to articulate your ideas on paper, right? And by going through the process of applying, you actually shape your idea a lot better. Now, if you end up getting into one of those programs, then they work with you and do a lot more work. In fact, one of my friends, I'm currently at an incubator in Washington, D.C. called Halcyon. I think that's how it's pronounced. But a young man I know from Nigeria, Eitayo, he runs utiva.org, so it's utiva.org, where he's training young people to get digital skills, right, for the 21st century. So coding, natural language processing, machine learning, all of it. He's training young people in Nigeria. And he just got into this incubator here in Washington, D.C. to help him further his idea along. So it's certainly a way you want to sort of go. Now, how much does access, so hi Rianne, how much can one access this opportunity, the average youth member, to gain access to such leadership opportunities with consultancy firms? By the way, consulting firms aren't the be all end all. I mentioned them in the context of just looking up their leadership programs online, right? And looking at what they teach. Honestly, if you, for example, don't get in, so say you apply to one of them and you don't get in, no problem. Go ask about like their content and what they teach, and what they, and their like development programs. This stuff is out there. It's easily available. Looks like even Africa Matters has a leadership development workshop as well, right? And so many that you can attend. So I would recommend. There's so many of them out there. It's important to get out there. Okay. How do young people protect their ideas from being stolen while seeking for assistance with fine-tuning? Fantastic question. It's a delicate balance. For me, even in the literature, research, when people who have researched innovation and how innovations work, in the past, it used to be that there would be the one brilliant person who just comes up with an idea and then, that's the innovation. But these days, it's very collaborative. And, as you share the idea with more and more people, you are sort of sharpening, right? And like knocking against others' ideas, and you're taking pieces of other ideas you've heard and you're putting them together. And that's how you're getting the innovation. It's not the likelihood that you can, in your own home, come up with an idea that's so brand new is fairly low. Even if you're in like natural sciences, right? Like, you're trying to discover the cure for cancer or something, you're most likely going to have worked with the ideas of others, right? So while I recognize it's a delicate balance and a lot of people want to keep their idea close to the chest, I always encourage sort of open dialogue and sharing, because that these days typically gets us the best ideas. Okay. Financial management is key. Can you highlight some of the challenges that young people might face as an entrepreneur if they lack such a skill? If you lack financial management skills, you better be making up for it with something else, some other kind of skill, right? If you were going to build a startup, for example, of course, we don't expect you to have all the skills, right? So I am an angel investor. I invest in a couple of startups and might even be doing a lot more investing in the coming months and years. It is, it's typically about the team that you have, right? But as an entrepreneur, as a first person who's starting, you have to have at least that sort of profit and loss type of mindset, right? You don't have to be the best at financial management, but you have to have a mindset that says, I understand that if I want to, so imagine, for example, as an investor, I give you $10,000, right? and then you say, oh, we're going to get this office space and we're going to make it fancy and we're going to do this nice thing and do this nice thing. Well, my first question is, where's money coming from to cover, like this 10,000 is supposed to be runway to get you to a point where you're making so much money that you can cover all of your expenses down the road. And even if you're not that great with Excel, if you're doing back of the envelope calculations, or you have some kind of notebook where you've done the thinking and the rationale, right? That's pretty much it. You have to be able to do that. Some people call it unit economics, some people call it financial management, but the idea is just being able to think in terms of, will there be a net, right, at the end of the day? A key piece to also mention is, sometimes if you're pitching to an investor, it's okay if you're going to make losses for the first 4 years or 5 years, right? The idea is that the investor's money will help you cover those losses, but you can't come and present an idea that sounds like you're never going to break even, right? This is supposed to be entrepreneurship and you're supposed to break even. Even if you're going to have a nonprofit, right? You've got to have a plan for how to ensure that whatever funds you raise in that year, you're going to spend down the right amount. So you're not always in negative, right? Nobody wants to put resources to someone who cannot manage resources well. And so the worst case scenario is you're just going to tell everyone that you're not the best person to manage, to do this, right? Because social entrepreneurship is necessarily about making very limited resources go very far for the most number of people. What free platforms can we go on to learn skills like project management, financial management, systems thinking, design thinking? So far, I think I know of Coursera, Udacity. Those two, I don't think that Coursera is always free, but Udacity I know for sure is certainly a very powerful platform for a lot of free courses. I also listen to podcasts. In fact, I started a journey in learning natural language processing, which is a branch of machine learning, by listening to a podcast, right? And that podcast, they typically tend to be free. If you just look it up, you'll find, much of my learning in project management in particular also came from a podcast. But there's also free resources online. There's the Project Management Book of Knowledge, right? PMBOK, which is a book. I think it's available online. That has like just the entire body of knowledge for project management. If you combine that with a podcast, you get a better sense. You can it's almost like having a teacher in a sense. I'm also happy to share other resources that I can't think of right now with the Africa Matters team, and then they can sort of send them around, or we can put them in the comments here later. Eroy says, how does these sets of recommendations apply in social justice for health equity arena? Are they different or the same? They're certainly very similar in terms of the recommendations. Social justice for health equity sounds a lot like, if I understand it right, sounds like advocacy work. And in particular, with advocacy work, the costs can tend to be quite high, right? And there's no sort of income, if you will. But I would recommend that you study the model of a One Campaign, right? They're a really big organization, but what I know that a lot of people in advocacy do is that they find effective partnerships. If you cannot build a whole sort of communication platform all by yourself, then you need to partner with those who already have it, right? And negotiate ways that you can work together to sort of enhance the platform of the message that you're trying to push. For example, I remember one now because I recently interviewed them for some social justice and health equity work that they did in Nigeria, and where relatively successful. But it was them working with a lot of partners to defray costs. One additional tool I can think of is called the business model canvas. It's a sort of think pad or a thought tool for you to really think about your ideas and shape them out. And in partners, in that business model canvas, the first half of it is like how you generate revenues, and the second half is about how you incur costs. And I think that the cost side, the way to reduce costs and to defray costs is by working with partners who can help you pull down the cost of what you're doing, of your operations. Okay, do you think youth can entrepreneur themselves out of poverty? Yeah, I think that's the question. I do believe so. Not only because I believe it, I've actually seen it happen. Like I said, with Generation Enterprise, we were investing in young people, especially low-income young people, and we would give them some money and then some guidance, and they would build their businesses, and at least in several cases they'd move their families out of the slums and into like nice brick houses, and so on and so forth. Now, what we were trying to do was to solve youth unemployment at scale, right? And so that wasn't necessarily the best way for us to do it, and which is why we pivoted. However, I have seen people sort of take the initiative, keep working hard, and getting it, but working hard and working smart. So just as an example, if you're a poor young person and you bake a cake or a loaf of bread, if everyone and everyone around you can pay maybe a maximum of $2 for that bread, that's not going to get you out of poverty selling it to those same people, right? But if your bread is high quality and you go to another side of town and you see that, oh, the maximum they're willing to pay is $10, $15, maybe even more, right? And you know that your bread is high quality and of course meets the standards and all that, then you use, like an entrepreneur, you take advantage of an opportunity that exists, and move in that direction. And those sort of payment flows, right, is what helps you start to earn more and build more value for yourself and for your customers. But of course, if you do not know how to engage with your customers, a lot of the young people we worked with, for example, we set up a cleaning business that allowed them to move from like lower income areas to higher income areas to serve them, right? To serve customers. But then sometimes they would have like body odor, like they wouldn't use deodorant, and so the body odor would be bothering the client. Of course the client's gonna fire you, right? So you really need to think about that, and how you engage clients. Okay, I think we should be rounding up, but I'm just going to answer the last few questions. What is the role of government in improving entrepreneurship and innovation on the continent? As I believe that within if you look at the examples of Japan, Korea, China, in sort of their trajectory and how they used entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs in the development of the nation, right? Then I think that just speaks to the role of government in general, right? Now, however, each country is very different. Their history is different, and where they're coming from is, and their trajectory is also somewhat different. Now, in the case of like Korea, or Japan. In Japan, they had these sort of conglomerates called jaibatsus. I think that's what they're called. In Korea, they were called cables, right? And the government essentially created these conglomerates, right, and gave them like preferential treatment to build industry. And so that's where we got like Kia from, and Samsung, and a lot of these big organizations back then, right? Now, is that the role of government right now? That's a tricky question, because even if we're talking about Africa, there's more than like 54, 55 countries there. It's difficult to say exactly what role government should play. But for me, I do believe that to some extent, it is important for government to promote entrepreneurship and promote as entrepreneurship, particularly among young people. But again, I definitely don't want to sound like a capitalist, or as though I'm promoting capitalism as the be all end all. But even the social democratic countries like Norway, etc., a lot of these countries do promote entrepreneurship in a particularly interesting way. Do you think that there are limits to entrepreneurship in terms of structural programs facing communities? Absolutely. Entrepreneurship is very, very limited. But entrepreneurship as a concept tends to be put into sort of the capitalist mindset, sort of box. I think that there is policy entrepreneurship, people who are doing really interesting work, even in government, right? Using technology to try to change things. So, for example, I know a few people who have jumped on initiatives like sort of like barcoding houses, right? So in Nigeria, it's very hard to find addresses and know who's where, and so government can't even like collect their revenues when they collect your trash, right? So, okay, let's put some barcodes on houses and then have an innovative system for ensuring that we collect revenue. So if we check your barcode and you haven't paid us, we won't collect your trash, things like that. You do need policy entrepreneurs. You need people who are there fighting, pushing to make this happen. Social entrepreneurs are there, right? Somebody mentioned social justice, right? You need people who are going to fight this fight and do it in fairly unconventional ways. And that's how I think of entrepreneurship. So yes, while entrepreneurship itself is very limited, I don't think that as a concept, I believe that as a concept, it probably is what we need inside our governments. I'm not saying governments should become entrepreneurial. No, that's not the point of government. I'm saying we do need policy entrepreneurs working in government. We need social entrepreneurs working together. We need different types of entrepreneurs across board who are helping to push the development agenda. And primarily because social entrepreneurs they tend to see the world as for the complex system that it is. It's why I generally encourage entrepreneurship. But certainly, governments have a role to play. Rule of law, stability. These are bigger issues that are far bigger than entrepreneurship, and certainly need to be addressed. But I don't know that this is the forum for those. All right. Thank you all so much. This has been wonderful. My first webinar ever. Sounds like it is complete. I will send the additional resources that I mentioned to, through the Africa Matters team or as part of the comments here. Thank you all so much, and I wish you all a wonderful day. Bye.